We're in a series called Do Something, where we're talking about injustice. We've said that injustices are just the things in our world that are unfair, unequal, or not right. So when we see someone bullied at school for the way that they look or talk, that's an injustice. Making assumptions about someone based on the color of their skin, that's an injustice. Students that go to sleep hungry or don't have enough to eat, that's an injustice. People stuck in a lifetime of poverty, that's an injustice. Injustices are the kinds of things that, when they happen, make us stop and say, wait a minute, that's not right. Somebody should do something about that. Some of us know injustice because we've seen it. Some of us know injustice because we've heard about it. And others of us, well, we know about injustice because we've experienced it. Maybe that's you. Maybe you were here last week and you thought, so we need to see injustice before we can do anything about it. That's great and all, but what about me? I'm living in the middle of injustice. It's happening to me. What am I supposed to do? Unfortunately, I think that's a question that we have to ask because for some of us in this room, injustice isn't just something that happens to somebody else. It's something that we've experienced before or are experiencing now. To show you what I mean, I'd like everyone to get out your phone or a flashlight if you've got one. Close your eyes and listen to the injustices I'm going to list. As I read them off, I want you to raise your light if you've experienced that injustice. But keep your eyes closed as we go. Are you ready? Okay. Raise your light if your school can't afford to give students laptops or tablets, but other schools can. Raise your light if you don't have access to a tutor, but your friends do. Raise your light if you have to wear the same clothes every day, but it seems like all of the other teenagers you know get new clothes all the time. Raise your light if your family can't afford for you to play sports or participate in a hobby. Raise your light if your family is struggling to pay their bills or provide food for everyone. Raise your light if you've been taken away from your parents and placed into the care of someone else. Raise your light if you've been abused or mistreated or hurt. Raise your light if you've been made fun of because of the neighborhood that you live in. Raise your light if you've been bullied in person. Raise your light if you've been bullied on social media. Raise your light if you've been the victim of racism. No matter what the injustice is, if you've ever experienced it, then you know how unfair and painful and hurtful it feels. And you're not alone. Everyone open your eyes and look around. So many of us have experienced injustice in one way or another. So many of us have gone through something that was unfair or not right. Before we go on, I want to say this. You don't deserve the injustice that you've experienced. All the way back to the very beginning when God created the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, God tells us that we humans have value because we were made in His image. We're not able to see God to know what He looks like, but we were created by Him to show others more of who He is. And because of that, you have value. Nothing ever will change that. You were made to be treated with respect, and it's not your fault that you were born into a broken world with rules and traditions and ideas about people. Those injustices you've experienced, they say a lot more about the brokenness and the hurt and the people who are putting you in those positions than they do about you. That being said, let's take a look at some people who experienced injustice together. In ancient times, there was a crazy king named Nebuchadnezzar. This powerful guy had conquered and captured God's people. And let's just say he was used to getting his way all the time. He decided to build a giant golden statue that stood 90 feet tall. And then he ordered everyone to bow down and worship the statue whenever they heard the music playing. And if they didn't, they would be thrown into a blazing fire. That is a lot, right? Well, there were these three Jewish leaders named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These guys worshiped God, and because of that, they refused to bow down to that statue. Good, you might say. But the people who were loyal to Nebuchadnezzar had other things to say about it. They plotted against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and basically snitched to the king. You can probably guess that the king wasn't thrilled by the news. Actually, the author of this book of the Bible, where this story is found, wrote down that the king, in a furious rage, ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be captured. He gave them one more chance to bow down and worship when the music played, or they would be thrown into the fire. But even then, in the face of punishment, these three guys stood their ground and refused to worship anyone other than God himself. So of course, the king was in full rage mode and ordered them to be thrown into the fire. Just like that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were tied up and thrown in. The Bible tells us the flames were so hot that the soldiers who threw them in died immediately from the heat. Insane, right? Now, can we all agree that this situation is totally and completely unfair? What happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego wasn't fair. It wasn't right, and it certainly wasn't something they deserved. So, what happened? Let's read on. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Now, we are not entirely sure who was in the fire with the men. Was it God? Was it Jesus? Was it an angel or someone like that? I don't know, but one thing is clear. God did not allow them to be alone in their situation. He didn't leave them in the fire to burn by themselves. He didn't let them suffer or experience the injustice by themselves. And that's a big deal, because it shows us that the same is true for us. We don't have to experience injustice alone. In other words, when you experience an injustice, you don't have to face it alone. You're never alone when you face injustice. In fact, Jesus demonstrated that when he came to earth, he came to be God here with us. He could have come as a king or a powerful person, but instead, he came to this world as a baby. He came as a person who would experience all of the things we experience, including injustice. Scripture tells us that he understands how we feel when we are treated unfairly, and he stands with us in it. He goes into the fires of injustice right beside us so that we don't have to do it alone. When you experience injustice, you don't have to face it alone. I love that story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because when you take a closer look, every person in it gives us a different view of what injustice may look like. Maybe you totally relate to the 3 guys in the fire. You've experienced the suffering that goes along with the injustice. Maybe you're experiencing it right now. If that's you, I want you to remember a few things. First, know that God is with you. He hears you. He made you in his image, and that means no matter what injustice you're experiencing, you have value, worth, and are deserving of respect. And God doesn't want you to walk through what you're experiencing alone. Number 2, share what you've experienced. If you're experiencing injustice right now or are dealing with an injustice that's happened to you in the past, I am so glad that you're here because we want this to be a safe space for you to process that. We want to be people who stand up for you and stand beside you. So today, I want to encourage you to begin by sharing what you've experienced. Maybe for you, that means sharing it with God in prayer, asking for him to remind you that you're not alone. Or maybe for you, that means just sharing with a trusted friend or a small group leader or another adult in your life who can help you. They're with you in this and don't want you to be alone. So take the step and talk to them about what you've experienced. They just might be the very people God has sent to your life to stand in the fire with you. The third thing is keep going. The guys in the fire never stood down. They didn't give up, and I don't want you to either. If you're experiencing an injustice, I want you to do something. Maybe that something is opening up to an adult. Maybe that something is standing up for yourself. Maybe that something is creating a group chat for friends for brainstorming ideas on how you can make a positive change. Maybe that something is joining with an organization who is already working against that injustice. Whatever it is, take a step to keep going. Now, of course, there's the other character in the story, King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, none of you are throwing people into a raging fire because they won't worship your statue. At least I hope you're not. But I think there have been times when, if we're honest, we could admit that we participated in an injustice against someone else. Maybe we're more like the people in the crowd in this story. We stood by and watched as an injustice happened to someone else. We didn't speak up or speak out. Maybe for you, that was laughing along when your buddy made a racist joke, or standing back while someone got bullied at school, being the bully, listening to music that disrespects women or other people, watching comedians who make fun of people from other cultures. Maybe it was allowing other people to take the blame for your mistake, or making fun of someone who couldn't afford new clothes. If that's you, I want you to know that just because you've been that person before doesn't mean that you have to stay that person now. You can change, and maybe the best step you can take against injustice is to make the change to be the person who doesn't contribute to injustice. You can talk to God about that too. You can ask Him to help you see the places you've participated in injustice, and you can ask Him to give you the courage to make it right. And maybe once you find that courage, you can become the person in the crowd who is brave enough to speak up and speak out when someone is about to experience injustice. You can be the voice who stands up to injustice when you see it. Remember, when you experience injustice, you don't have to face it alone. That's why we have small groups. Of all the places in the whole world, your small group should be for you and listening to you. They should be praying with you and learning from you. And they should be encouraging you and cheering for you. Listen, today has the potential to be one of the most honest, raw, personal, and important small group conversations that we have ever had. You have the opportunity to see and care about the injustice happening right in front of you, within your small group. I want everyone to show up for that conversation. If you've experienced injustice, how can you let the group know that you need support? And if you haven't, how can you listen and genuinely care for someone in your group? Maybe the first step is letting your leader be that person for you. Maybe all of that sounds too much right now, and if that's you, I totally get it. Even if you don't talk to your whole group right now, I hope you'll talk to your leader later. They signed up to do this because they want to be here for you. And maybe today, they can be a real human reminder that when you're experiencing injustice, you don't have to face it alone.